Hi, I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years, I used living history in the classroom to try to hook my students into a subject that they felt was probably as dead as the people they were studying. And to that end, I would wear garb for the different time periods that we were covering and in the different cultures. And I would bring stuff in for them to handle. I would think of them as artifacts, people that wanted to use all the, $50 words for their profession would refer to them as realia or manipulatives. Basically, it's stuff kids could touch. So it's a kid-friendly museum and experience. And I would play music for the time period in the background and immerse my kids in entire cultures, or at least as much as I could in the space of an hour every day. Well, I did that for 36 years, but I'm not in the classroom anymore. So what I'm doing is I'm repurposing myself. I have this room at the house that is filled to capacity with garb. It doesn't even fit in the closets or the dressers anymore. And I still have this passion for bringing the past to life, and that's why I'm involved in historical reenactment on the weekends. I want to preserve landmarks because landmarks tend to go away. And I've been discovering that recently and relearning that lesson. And I want to document at least where they were. I also like to play amateur anthropologist and amateur archaeologist and history detective. I like to put the pieces together. And so I decided when I was no longer in the classroom, I needed to repurpose myself. So what I'm doing right now is I'm on a very pretentious sounding mission Odyssey, where I intend to visit each of the sites in Alta California that had to do with the mission era. So that could be the missions themselves, the Asistencias. Those are spin-off missions or intended to grow up to be full-fledged missions, and almost none of them became that. Estancias, those are ranchos or stations for the missions that were supposed to raise food for them, and of course most of those are paved over, or you have condos and townhouses there, and so there's always a hunt for that. The presidios, those are the fortifications designed to protect the missions, and anything else that just happens to fit into this framework. So I will cover the American period in California. I will also cover Native American stuff and whatever works here. And so what I'm doing today is I am traveling from Mission San Jose. That's the 18th mission that I visited in Alta California, because I'm working my way up the coast, and I'm headed towards Pacifica to track down the remains of the Asistencia San Pedro y San Pablo, which later became Rancho San Pedro, and see what's there and tell the story of that place. But I also found another reference to something that doesn't seem to fit into any of the categories. I've seen mention in San Mateo of a place only referred to as the Hospice, and no matter how much I dig, that's the name I keep finding, and vague suggestions about what it was for. So I intend to visit both of those places and see what's there, and I hope you stick with me on my journey. 14th, 1769, Governor Portola leads what is referred to as his grand expedition. He takes 63 soldados de cuerda, leather jacket soldiers, and 100 mules and supplies packed on the mules and people to control the mules, and he marches north. During this epic 4-month-long expedition, the pioneros or pioneers blazed a trail for the rest of the 63-man party. And as they traveled north, Governor Portola and Padre Crespi, who was the diarist, made note of sites for future missions. But they didn't identify Monterey Bay. Instead, they moved past it to explore the San Francisco Peninsula. Portola pushed on, going north in desperation, looking for the Bay of Monterey, trying to match up the descriptions from Vizcaíno's pilot from 1602 with what he was seeing. And it was at this point that he finally said, okay, enough. There's this big body of water out there, turned out to be San Francisco Bay, and he figured out, we can't get around this, it's going to take forever. His mission was not to explore, his mission was to find a route from San Diego to Monterey Bay, and he thought he had failed. So at this point, he's going to turn around and head back to San Diego, and then Padre Cerro will say, hey, let's go back north again. Other expeditions would go north, and if you look at the map, the red and the orange, those were the Portola expeditions. The yellow squiggly line going all over the place, that's the expedition of Juan Bautista de Anza. And in 1776, the De Anza expedition will end up basically locate the sites for the future El Presidio de San Francisco to control San Francisco Bay militarily. And the diarist with him, Padre Pablo, I believe he was just simply writing things down. He's probably going to be the one that picks a site for Mission San Francisco de Asís or Mission Dolores, the first of the two missions established to help control the bay. Beside the bay that Portola ended up discovering while he was looking for the Bay of Monterey, unsuccessfully, even though he found it but he didn't know it, the Spanish established a sixth mission, San Francisco de Asís, which is also known as Mission Dolores, and they established a presidio there by the bay. 10 years later, Padre Cambon will establish an Asistencia from Mission Dolores, and it'll be at Pacifica. It'll be called Asistencia San Pedro y San Pablo, and the purpose was to, of course, spread the gospel, but also to raise food for the mission. Who were the people that were living here that were supposed to be served by the Asistencia? Well, those would be the Olani, who were the natives to the area. They made up a majority of the population of Mission San Francisco de Asís or Mission Dolores, depending on which one you want to use, and Mission San Jose. And they lived by hunting and gathering, which means they weren't really interested in the Spanish coming in and wanting to have them abandon their traditional way of life. Here, try something new. You'll have to work harder, but hard work's good for you. An additional purpose of the Asistencia San Pedro y San Pablo was that it wasn't just simply a station which was growing food and converting the Olani and bringing them in as neophytes. It also served in a way as a rest stop for the Padres traveling between Mission San Francisco de Asís and Mission Santa Cruz, which had been established. And that was a 74-mile journey. Of course, the Asistencia happens to be 16 miles from San Francisco, so it's not really a halfway point. There wasn't really a whole lot to this Asistencia. There was a series of rooms surrounding three sides of an open-ended plaza. Initially, there was a chapel, tack room, and a granary built, as well as making 2,000 bricks for future projects, because there were ambitions here. Within 3 years, there was a second granary, quarters for padres, and the mayordomo or foreman were added, a couple more rooms, a covered passageway which temporarily served as a kitchen to round it out. And you're not looking at a whole lot of people here. This was an outpost that was designed, as I said, to grow food for the support of the Mission Dolores and also to support the Presidio at San Francisco. Crops of wheat and beans were planted in quantities to provide for the needs of the parent mission. Corn, peas, barley, asparagus, and rosemary would in time also be cultivated, along with grape vineyards and groves of peach trees. In 1791, there was an epidemic which wiped out many of the Olani. Now that the workforce is dwindling, the Padres did a shift of emphasis from agriculture to raising cattle. The facility is going to be abandoned, but there's various years given for it. It could have been 2 years later in 1793 or in 1828, or when secularization officially started in 1834. So secularization happens in 1834. And at this point, there isn't much of a native population here. There isn't much of a facility here at all, as far as what's left of the Asistencia. And Governor Alvarado in 1839 will grant Rancho San Pedro, as it's being called, to Francisco Sanchez. So this will be his territory for a while. In return for his former service to Mexico, the former Comandante of the San Francisco Presidio and 8th Alcalde of the city of San Francisco received not only 9,000 acres of land, but also all of the buildings of the Asistencia. He built an adobe residence for his family between 1842 and 1846 at the site of the abandoned Asistencia in the San Pedro Valley, now the Lindamar Valley. It's also widely believed that Sanchez reused a lot of the adobe from the Asistencia buildings to build his adobe, which is behind me. Becoming a respected U.S. citizen when California was ceded to the United States in 1848, Sanchez managed to retain ownership of the property. Now in 1862, when he dies, the land is going to get sold off to an American named Kirkpatrick. Edward Kirkpatrick, the new owner, expanded the house during the late 1880s, enlarging it to 20 rooms. The adobe, which at one point became a hotel called the Adobe House, became the San Pedro Hotel in 1908, a speakeasy during Prohibition. It operated as a restaurant until the late 1930s and ultimately ended up serving as a farm building associated with artichoke farming in the San Pedro Valley during the 1940s. As to what remains of the Asistencia, there are logs outlining where the various buildings once stood. Off to go look for another possible Asistencia in San Mateo. During the 1776 expedition of Juan Bautista de Anza, Padre Pedro Font, the diarist, Lieutenant Jose Joaquin Moraga, and 11 soldados set up camp next to a creek Padre Font would name San Mateo Creek. In time, an Asistencia was established at San Pedro y San Pablo, but now the Spanish needed to further expand facilities because the 46-mile journey from Mission Santa Clara to Mission Dolores was a long one, and so the outpost was established at San Mateo Creek to bring the church to the peninsula, to organize and oversee the newly converted Christians in livestock herding, and to provide food for the mission and the Presidio. Part of the reason I'm doing this Mission Odyssey is to make sure I record landmarks before they disappear. And here's a perfect example. When the missions and the Asistencias and all the stuff associated with the missions was secularized, a lot was lost. And when restorations took place, well, sometimes people were lucky and sites were restored. Others were rebuilt with a different vision of what they, should have looked like, meaning they're copying other missions that they knew. Some just plain go away. And there's always a pecking order. If you have an estancia, or which was a ranch to support the mission, it seemed more prestigious to call it an asistencia. If there was an asistencia involved, it became more prestigious to refer to it as a mission. There are a couple examples that I know of. What I'm looking for here doesn't fit any of the categories. Around 1800, Padres built a place in what is now San Mateo called the Hospice. I have never found any other name for it, but what it was it was supposed to be basically a rest area for the Padres making the tedious journey from Mission Santa Clara to Mission Dolores and the Presidio in San Francisco. All I've been able to find is the name, the Hospice. I've seen pictures of a plaque. There is no plaque here anymore. I don't know quite how to categorize it, but again, this is one of those examples of why I'm doing this. Since I filmed, I did find the name Mission Dolores Asistencia at San Mateo as a name for the hospice. I also found that since the site was used to be a center of ranching cattle and also to convert native Californians, that fits the bill for what an asistencia was. And during secularization, the Asistencia's lands were also divided up into ranchos. The plaque is gone. So, what does a train station that was opened in 1894 have to do with the missions we've been covering and the other sites? So here's what the Burlingame railway station has to do with the mission era. Yeah, there's tiles up there and it looks sort of mission-like. Those tiles were taken from Mission San Antonio de Padua, Mission Soledad, Mission Dolores, and the Asistencia San Pedro y San Pablo. They got recycled. Now, the tiles were bought in good faith by the citizens of Burlingame and the Southern Pacific Railway, but they had been salvaged by someone wanting to make a buck. 18 missions accomplished, 9 Asistencias, a couple of estancias, 3 presidios. Now it's on to San Francisco. I hope you stick with me on my journey.